thank the Leader of the House. In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition, questions without notice.
Thank you. My questions to the Prime Minister. Congratulations on your words at White Ribbon this morning. All of us agree that family violence is a national crisis. Rosie Batty, the Productivity Commission, the Victorian Royal Commission into Family Violence have all recommended that family violence survivors should not be cross-examined in court by their abusers. Will the Prime Minister join with Labor to amend the Family Law Act to ensure that vulnerable witnesses are protected during court proceedings?
The Prime Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question and thank him and his colleagues and all members for their support for White Ribbon. Addressing domestic violence is a priority for all of us. We have to stop it. Violence against women and children is utterly unacceptable. And you know, Mr Speaker, the truth is that not all disrespect of women ends up with violence against women, but that is where all violence against women begins. And we have to lead with legislation and with investments and government actions. But you know, one of the most important things we have to do is say, as parents, as grandparents, that it is our responsibility to make sure our sons and our grandsons grow up to respect the women in their lives, beginning with their mothers and their sisters, those most close to them. That is critically important. It's a point my wife Lucy has often made. It's a powerful one. That role of leadership is driving cultural change, and that advertising campaign that I know all of us have admired, Stop It at the Start, that Michaelia Cash, the Senator Cash, oversaw as being particularly effective. Now, let me address the issue of cross-examination. We all understand that the cross-examination of a victim by the alleged perpetrator is a very traumatic experience. Now, we are working very closely with the stakeholders in this area, in particular the judges and magistrates of the family courts, to progress measures to support vulnerable witnesses. We're establishing integrated duty lawyer and domestic violence support services in the family law courts to improve the support available to victims, and that includes assisting them to draft notices of risk and access alternative ways to give evidence. We've also commissioned a bench book which provides guidance for all judicial officers dealing with domestic and family violence, including guidelines for courtroom management to minimise secondary abuse through court processes of those who've experienced family violence. Judges and judicial officers always have a discretion, of course, in this area, and we're encouraging them to use this very actively to ensure that these distressing circumstances don't occur. I noted what the honourable member opposite proposed this morning and the funding that he recommended, which we at first examination would not appear to us to be adequate for the task that he's proposed it. But I can assure honourable members opposite we are very well aware of the trauma that victims undertake or suffer if they are cross-examined by a perpetrator, and we've put in place the measures to ensure that that does not occur where it would create that type of trauma.
The member for Petrie.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please update the House on the government's record of delivering on its election commitments, including tackling union corruption and ensuring that employer organisations are more accountable to their members as well?
Members on both sides, the Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr Speaker, the government is getting on with the job. We are delivering for the Australian people. We're providing the strong and stable economic leadership Australia needs in this time of great change and even greater opportunity, to secure our future prosperity, to ensure that our children and grandchildren can enjoy the same and better standards of living than that which we enjoy. We must live within our means, and we must continue to pursue sound economic reforms, and that's exactly what we're doing. Just this morning, the Parliament has passed our superannuation reforms, ensuring that the superannuation system is fair and sustainable for all Australians. We're making the 45th Parliament work, an obligation, Mr Speaker, that falls to all of us, delivering important economic reforms, including around $20 billion in gross budget repair, tax cuts to stop 500,000 middle-income Australians from entering the second highest tax bracket, building on our big export trade deals by enhancing our free trade and strategic agreement with Singapore. And, Mr Speaker, for the first time, the Parliament has passed the Registered Organisation Bill. The 44th Parliament rejected it 3 times. Now it's been passed, and what this will do is ensure that union officials are as accountable to their members as company directors are to their shareholders. We are cracking down on the dishonesty and the malfeasance, the misuse and the abuse that's become all too common with union bosses. We're standing up for the workers. We're standing up for the members of the trade unions. They are entitled to see that their money is well spent. They're entitled to know how it's spent. They're entitled to know where there is conflicts of interest. They need to be entitled to know whether their funds, their hard-earned union dues, are being frittered away by union officials on personal extravagances. Now, you would think that the Leader of the Opposition, a former union boss himself, a former senior union leader, would support this. After all, given the scandals that we saw with Craig Thompson and others, given those scandals exposed, so many of them in the Hayden Royal Commission, the 2 arrests just over the last few days, $870,000 misappropriated from the National Union of Workers, some of the lowest paid workers in Australia. Mr Speaker, you would think that the Labor Party, composed as it is of so many former union officials, would say here is a chance to clean up the act, here is a chance to make unions more attractive than they are today, make people more confident about joining them. Well, Labor did not. Labor backed the bosses, we backed the members.
Member for Gorton. Start again. The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Ratings agency Standard & Poor's has today warned that Australia's AAA credit rating will be at risk unless the Treasurer stands by his commitment to a surplus in 2021, a commitment which is in the Treasurer's own budget papers bearing his name. Does the Treasurer take any responsibility for placing Australia's AAA rating at risk with his chaotic management of the budget?
The members on my right, the member for Gilmore, the member for Corangamite. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. The budget is projected to return to balance in 2021, and that balance is contingent upon the $40 billion worth of budget improvement measures that are contained in the budget and the forward estimates being passed by this parliament. Now, I'm pleased, as the Prime Minister has just reminded the House, some $20 billion of that $40 billion has already been passed through this parliament in just these few sitting weeks since the last election. Now, that demonstrates that this government is getting on with the job of implementing our budget measures, but there remain a further $20 billion, which those opposite substantively remain opposed to, and the greatest guarantee that those opposite could give to the Australian people to support the AAA credit rating is to say that they will support the government's budget savings measures. That is what stands in the way. That is what stands in the way. The government has laid out our plan, Mr Speaker, in the budget. It is those opposite refusal to stand up to their economic responsibility, to heed the warnings from the ratings agencies and pass the government's budget. But, Mr Speaker, they have an alternative plan. They have an alternative plan. Their view is that the ratings agencies would rush to reaffirm Australia's AAA credit rating if the deficit was increased by $16.8 billion. So confident were they that that would be the case that they took a $16.5 billion increased deficit to the last rejection. And you know what happened to that rejection? At the last election. At the last election. You took a $16.5 billion deficit increase in the last election, and it is no surprise that the Australian people rejected you.
The member for Moreton will cease interjecting. The member for Jagga. Again, we're heading down a certain track, I fear, with the member for Jagga. The member for Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question also is to the Treasurer. And will he update the House on how the government is strengthening Australia's economy by reducing the deficit and arresting debt? And will the Treasurer again explain how important it is that budget measures currently before Parliament are passed to protect Australia's AAA credit rating?
Treasurer has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for her question. I thank the member for her question and her keen interest, and more importantly, I thank her for her support and those who sit on this side of the House for their support for the government's budget, which is projected to return to balance in 2021. But as I just remarked to the House, there are some impediments that stand in the way of that, and they sit opposite, Mr. Speaker. They sit opposite. And I seek none other than the support given by the former Treasurer and Prime Minister Paul Keating, who said this, Mr. Speaker, earlier this year. He said, when Commonwealth revenue has been so affected, the penny ought to drop, that what we should be doing is cutting spending, and that's what the Treasurer, referring to myself, Mr. Speaker, has said for some weeks now. And on this point, he's actually right, Mr. Speaker. So we have the former Treasurer and Prime Minister, which the Shadow Treasurer claims to be his great mentor, telling him direct, just as the ratings agencies are telling him direct, pass the budget savings measures to ensure the security of Australia's AAA credit rating. Now, already, as a government, since 2013, under both Prime Minister Abbott and Prime Minister Turnbull, we have cut the rate of spending growth from 4.2% under the budgets of those opposite to around 1.5% on the budgets of the coalition government. Now, that's what we've achieved, Mr. Speaker, and that's how we are arresting the debt. But we are faced with the impediment of those opposite who would rather spend more and tax more and raise debt to even higher levels than actually face up to their economic responsibility and come into this place and support the government's comprehensive plan to achieve budget repair. The measures that I refer to, some $20 billion, we have already been able to pass through this parliament, and they include the superannuation measures, which included some $6 billion in additional revenue, but that also included $3 billion of investment back into the superannuation system, a world-leading superannuation system, to ensure that it is fairer, to ensure it is more flexible and to ensure it is sustainable. Now, those opposite spoke an untruth to the Australian people at the last election. What they did at the last election is they said on superannuation that they would do the same thing as the government when it came to the revenue net position in their own estimates. That's what they said. They didn't tell the Australian people that they wanted to tax contributions more. They didn't tell those who run home-based businesses and those who are contractors and those who are seeking to catch up on their concessional contributions because they've been carers or they've been having children. They didn't tell them they were going to strip those flexibility measures away. They didn't tell them that at all. They went to the Australian people and misled them on superannuation, and now in this parliament they've made a promise that at the next election the only party that is going to be taxing superannuation more is led by the Leader of the Opposition.
Has expired. The member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is also to the Treasurer. Ratings agency Standard & Poor's has today warned that Australia's AAA rating will be at risk unless revenue is increased in a sustained way. Why is the Treasurer refusing to support sensible reforms on negative gearing and capital gains?
The Leader of the House. The Leader of the House. The Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of the $40 billion in budget improvement measures that we set out in our budget, and he's a little excited today, Mr. Speaker, a little excited, but, Mr Speaker, in the $40 billion of measures that we took to the Australian people, $25 billion of those measures related to payment savings and $15 billion of those measures related to revenue. So there was a balance of the two to ensure that we bring the budget back to balance. Now, we think we got the balance right when it comes to the balance between taxes and expenditures. And what we have done as a government is we've always ensured that where our expenditure is increased, that we've offset that with payment savings. Not revenue increases, but payment savings. And so when we've gone to the Australian people and we've said that we are going to cut taxes, as we have done for personal income tax and legislated through this place, or when we have gone to the Australian people, as we have said, and we've said we want businesses, particularly small businesses with a turnover up to $10 million, to be able to access a lower rate of tax and to be able to access the instant asset write-off and the pool depreciation provisions, we have offset the cost of revenue with other revenue measures, Mr Speaker. That's how you actually drive yourself towards a budget balance. But those opposite are a one-trick pony when it comes to the budget. And the only thing that they are able to come up with is just tax people more, Mr Speaker. They are addicted to tax. And rather than try and ease the burden on Australian businesses so they can give Australians more opportunity for more hours, Mr Speaker, they just want to keep squeezing that tax lemon as hard as they possibly can. Now, that presents a great threat to our economy. We already know that the United Kingdom, and they'll bring down their autumn statement tonight, Mr Speaker, we already know that they have put the UK on a trajectory to one of the lowest tax rates in the advanced world. And we know that the Trump administration, Mr Speaker, will be seeking to do exactly the same thing. And, Mr Speaker, we have already moved in our budget to take Australia down a similar path. Those opposite plan to strand Australian businesses in a high-tax environment where they can't invest, where they can't attract capital, where they can't provide additional working hours and additional wages to working Australians, Mr Speaker. This is a leader of the opposition who, rather than following the economic policy advice of Bob Hawke, has become an acolyte of Bob Brown, Mr Speaker, when it comes to economic policy. He is the Jeremy Corbyn of Australian politics, Mr Speaker, appealing to the Bernie Sanders and all the rest of it, Mr Speaker. This is a leader of the opposition who is so indulgent in cynical politics he cannot find his way to the surface again.
The member for Kennedy.
Deputy PM, you're aware of the notorious Flinders River water allocations. Almost all of these waters, worth over $180 million, have been granted to just 2 absentee landlord corporations. This was in contrast to a refusal to even consider submissions from the people of the area itself that were based upon economic development, industry and community benefit. The most serious questions of ministerial and departmental impropriety are raised here. In light of this impoverishment of the hands-on to provide for the enrichment of the rich, would the minister consider right to sustenance legislation, rights enshrined in and from the time of the Magna Carta itself?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and at times I stay up late at night deliberating on the issues of Runnymede 1215 and exactly what was going on between King John and those feudal lords. I do acknowledge that after a few months that they broke out into a war in any case, so it wasn't of much use, but he does speak to a rather more substantive issue that is the issue of water. Predominantly.
Members on my left and right, the Minister for Immigration and the member for Grayndler are interrupting the minister. The Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Look, Mr Speaker, I take the interjection from the member from Grayndler who's claiming that he built the Magna Carta. So the issue, of course, is that one of water. The water licences for the member for Kennedy are predominantly a state issue, or overwhelmingly a state issue, especially on the Flinders. I note the concerns you have, and we too are wanting to develop the north and build more water infrastructure. It's vitally important, and that's why we have put up money for 14 sites, for feasibility on 14 sites in Queensland, and $130 million on the table for Rookwood Weir. Unfortunately, Mr Speaker, the Queensland Labor government has been either tardy or unwilling to participate in, and we're still waiting for their support so we can get these things moving. Also in the members' electorate, one of those feasibility studies is at Cloncurry, and we've got to try and drive these agendas forward, because we know that water is wealth, and if we're driving jobs and creating jobs, we've got to create the water infrastructure. Now, the member for Kennedy can take some solace from the fact that we are hard at work in Tasmania building that same water infrastructure. We've completed Chaffey Dam. We've put money also on the table for the South West Loddon Pipeline, for Macalester Irrigation District. These programs are up and running, and we want to start more. We want to go further. We want to be the government that has the vision to build the water infrastructure. And I appreciate the trip that I took with the member for Kennedy to Hell's Gate, where we also have put money on the table for the feasibility and the study of that. That would be a tremendous project, but we need the same sense of fervour, the same sense of excitement as was seen by the people who built the Snowy Mountain scheme. That's the sort of vision that our nation is looking for. That is the sort of vision that people want from a government that actually believes in the delivery of the tactile, in the things that you can see, rather than standing on their philosophical log and procrastinating and just waiting and waiting and waiting till nothing happens. So if it's a vision that you had on the 15th of June, 12:15 at Runnymede, where the not-so-good King John was taken on by the not-so-good feudal lords, then that's the sort of vision. But ultimately the document was sustainable through time, and we want to build water infrastructure that's sustainable through time for the Australian people.
The member for Page.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister explain to the House how enforcing the rule of law on construction sites through the reintroduction of the ABCC will benefit the hard-working Australians I represent in the agricultural industry?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for Page for his question, a person who understands the benefit to the Australian working man and woman from the production of food and from the delivery and the processing of food. We note in the areas such as the macadamia production that he has in his electorate, the great jobs that are produced not only by the farmers but also by the people who are processing the macadamias, and also in the casino meatworks, cooperative meatworks. And I commend the work that he's been doing with cooperatives, but those meatworks employing working men and women and making sure that they have the capacity to go home with a fair day's work after a fair day's pay after a fair day's work. But unfortunately, from time to time, Mr Speaker, we have an impediment in trying to bring forward these further jobs that is so essential to the Australian economy. And we note, for instance, the $280 or so million that was put aside to build the Melbourne wholesale fruit and vegetable markets. Unfortunately, when they went to build it, well, there was a bit of a fight. You think it'd be between the farmers wanting it bigger? No, it was between the member of Griffith's crowd, the CFMEU, and the member for Maribyrnong's crowd, the AWU. And they went to fight and just kept fighting and fighting and fighting until, in the end, the ABCC took them to the federal court and ordered that they remove the blockades, which was costing millions of dollars to get back to work. So what did they do? What would they do when the court of the land says to go back to work? Of course, you would think that they would obey they would obey that order. No, they didn't. The CFMEU was obviously above the law. Above the law. They don't have to comply with the law. No, that's for regular men and women of Australia, not the CFMEU. They can just make their own arrangements. And you can see it again in the desal plant, where it was costing up, where the CFMEU went on strike, costing $5 million a day. Now, the issue for the member for Page and for everybody here is that we must believe in the rule of law. We can't have mum and dad operators going onto work sites and being bullied by thugs who just stand over them, thugs whose belief thugs whose belief is not in a fair day's work and a fair day's pay, but just extorting money and extorting ridiculous conditions out of it. And of course the Labor Party would be the champion. They would be the champion of the CFMEU, with a member for Griffith's involvement with the CFMEU, with a member for Shortland's involvement with the CFMEU, with a member for Cobal's involvement with the CFMEU. These are part of the process, and they are paying their dues here at the moment. They are paying their dues. They are paying their dues to make sure that they deliver back to the CFMEU, who is also has delivered millions of dollars to the Australian Labor Party. The problem with the Labor Party these days, Mr Speaker, is there's not many labourers in it. An awful lot of union officials, not many labourers. But we will make sure that we give our very best endeavours to getting the cop back on the beat.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Today, ratings agency Standard & Poor's warned that Australia's AAA credit rating will be at risk unless the government stands by its commitment to a surplus in 2021. On this basis, why is the Prime Minister still persisting with his $50 billion tax handout to big business when a ratings downgrade will push up the mortgage repayments for Australian homeowners?
Yeah. Members on my right. The member for Gilmore.
There was a time when the Labor Party understood, indeed a prominent figure on the opposition benches wrote a book about it, that reducing company tax, reducing business taxes would, because it increased the return on investment, deliver more investment. And if you get more investment, you know what? You get more jobs. And around the world, countries are reducing business taxes. We've pointed to the policies of the incoming administration in the United States, but you can look at what the UK government has done, and that has been a policy. It was a policy followed by Labor governments in this place as well, for the obvious reason: you increase the return on investment, you get more investment. Now, turning to the ratings agencies, the ratings agencies have been absolutely crystal clear. Their concern is that the government's budget will not be passed through the parliament because of the reckless opposition of the Labor Party. That's what their concern is. They recognise that we have a plan, we have an economic plan which sets out a path towards a budget surplus. They recognise that and they accept it. Their concern is the political risk, and that's why they welcomed the Omnibus Savings Bill, that's why they welcomed the passage of the superannuation reforms, and that's why they've welcomed our ability, when it is there, to secure our budget policies through the Senate. But you know, Mr Speaker, we work very hard and respectfully and constructively with the crossbench, and we do so, and we'll continue to do so. But the Labor Party know very well that any and every measure in that budget can be passed if they support it. And it is their opposition which puts the AAA rating at risk. It's the political risk. Yes, the honourable member says you're the government, and you're quite right. That's something you haven't quite twigged to yet. We are the government. We won the election. But the reality is that you can't turn around. You can't turn around and say to us, you're at risk of the AAA rating being pulled because of the rating agencies, when the risk the ratings agencies identify is that the government's plan will not get through the Senate because of the trenchant political opposition of the Labor Party. So, if the Labor Party is concerned about the AAA rating, if they want to support the AAA rating, and we'd be grateful for it, then they should support the budget measures, because their passage will secure it.
Just before I call the member for Dunkley, I'd like to inform the House we have present in the chamber this afternoon a delegation from Cambodia led by His Excellency Mr Kim Yeat. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer advise the House on the importance of strong economic growth to employment security, job creation and wage growth for hard-working Australians? How important is it that the government continue to promote productivity and reduce inefficiencies that drag on our economy?
The Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for his question and his support for the measures that this government is seeking and is introducing to ensure greater productivity in the Australian economy, because from that comes the growth, from that comes the investment, from that comes the jobs and the wages. And the way you lift revenue in this country, if you want a budget balance, is you need to ensure that businesses are earning more, that employees are earning more, that they're getting extra hours. And to do that, you need a tax environment which supports business, particularly small business, to achieve that. But you also need an environment in the building and construction industry that when businesses and others go and invest, that they're not hit with a 30% premium as a result of the lawlessness in the building and construction industry, Mr Speaker. And I notice that the member for Grayndler has said very recently, I understand last night, that now is the time for the Commonwealth to lift investment right across the nation. Well, it might be news to the member for Grayndler that under the Labor Party, Commonwealth investment as a share of public investment under Labor was an average of 24%. Under this government, it's an average of 30.5%, Mr Speaker. So this government has been lifting investment in Commonwealth investment, but investment, particularly in public infrastructure, is hampered by those opposite who continue to frustrate and work against the restoration of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Now, yesterday I asked a very polite question of those opposite, of those who happen to be members of registered trade unions, and none of them put their hands up. I asked them who were members of the CFFEU. So, Mr Speaker, I thought this may be a reason as to why, in unions' interests, they may be seeking to protect the lawlessness in the building and construction industry on behalf of militant unions. So I did a little bit of homework. It turns out that when you look at the register of members' interests of the 68 members of parliament who sit opposite, only 32 have not listed any union membership at all on their register of interest. Now, that's interesting because when I look at the membership form of the ALP, which is a requirement, it says member of affiliated union, Mr Speaker. So why is it, Mr Speaker, why is it that the member for Batman thinks it's important to declare a 1 to 400 scale model of a short-fin Barracuda submarine, but he doesn't think it's relevant to disclose the fact of his membership, as others have on that side, of being a member of a trade union? And if we go to the actual register of interest question, and I happen to have the member for McMahon's one here, who strangely enough hasn't mentioned what union he's a member of, but I'm glad to know that he's a member of the Marconi Club and the Gilbert West Leagues, fine institutions, great clubs, but he hasn't mentioned what union he's a member of, Mr Speaker. And question 13 says membership of any organisation.
Treasurer's time has expired. The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Revenue. It's been revealed that Australia's biggest banks will have to pay almost $180 million in compensation because they spent years charging over 200,000 customers fees for services that they did not actually receive. Is this what the minister meant when she said she wanted to lift superannuation funds to the same standards as banks? Does the minister really want superannuation account holders to be treated the way banks treat their customers?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the member for her question, and I note that she, along with those opposite, believe that it is incredibly important that the mandated superannuation system, that we force people to defer their wages that they earn today to save for their retirement income into the future. They think it is acceptable that they have lower governance standards than that currently applies to banks and life insurance companies. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous to think that millions of Australians who have their money in superannuation funds would have funds that have lower governance standards than that currently applies to banks and to life insurance companies. And it's not actually something that we have dreamt up on this side of the House. In fact, there was a review that was undertaken under Labor's watch by Jeremy Cooper, a hand-picked person from Labor for the job, who concluded that the governance standards for superannuation funds was not up to the mark. He said that there needed to be at least 1/3 of independent directors on these boards. A second review that was conducted by David Murray said that there needed to be a majority of independent directors and an independent chair on these boards. It is so unacceptable to think that all of the problems that could occur within these funds can continue without there being appropriate oversight. Now, let me just quote a couple of other people who think that this might be a good idea. Ken Henry, who was the former advisor to Paul Keating and former Treasury Secretary, has been reported as saying this. He said it was time that industry funds accepted the need for new governance standards as advocated by the government. He said that the trade union movement should be proud of the system it created, but the argument that the system isn't broken, so why fix it, was a bit like saying that a house that hadn't been torched shouldn't have insurance. Now, Paul Howes, the former Australian union workers boss, has said it has been disappointing to see a knee-jerk reaction against the call for a more independent governance model. Equal representation has been a success, but the evolution of the superannuation industry is important, and I can't see anything negative in having more independence on boards. Those on this side of the House want to protect their union mates and union bosses in maintaining access to slush funds. We think it is completely and utterly inappropriate, and we will stand up for members, we will stand up for what's right for them, and we will stand up for their interests.
The member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment. Will the Minister explain why it is critical to maintain a consistent approach to occupational health and safety in the workplace, and how that will be assisted by the establishment of the Registered Organisations Commission and the Australian Building and Construction Commission?
The Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Banks for his question. It's a very important question because occupational health and safety, a safe workplace, is the most important priority in every single workplace in Australia for employers and equally employees. That is the first task of every business, is to ensure that their employees are in a safe workplace, and it's one of the most important requirements of unions, of course, to represent their members to ensure that they are in safe workplaces. And that, Mr Speaker, of course, is the reason why the Labor Party should support the Registered Organisations Commission being established, which they have tried to oppose and failed this week, which is why it's an important signature reform. It's why they should support the Australian Building and Construction Commission, because healthy unions are good for their members. Honest union leaders looking after their members rather than lining their pockets should be the outcome that every member in this House should be seeking. So, Mr Speaker, I find it very strange indeed, the hypocrisy, the hideous hypocrisy that members of the Labor Party, and particularly this Leader of the Opposition, show in their feigned concern about safety in the workplace for workers, Mr Speaker. Their feigned concern about safety in the workplace, when, in fact, the Leader of the Opposition deliberately parachuted into the Senate Kimberley Kitching to become Senator Kitching, who is alleged to have fraudulently filled out the safety tests for 6 union leaders in the Health Services Union. So on the one hand, they had a captain's pick where the Leader of the Opposition put Kimberley Kitching, Senator Kitching, into the Senate, when the Trade Union Royal Commission has referred her to the Commonwealth DPP for fraudulently, it is alleged, filling out the safety tests for 6 union leaders from the Health Services Union and bragging about it. So put union leaders into workplaces pretending that they'd done the safety tests and safety standards that were necessary to go into those work sites, put those people into those work sites knowing that they did not have those safety standards that were required. So, with one reckless decision by the Leader of the Opposition over the complaints, the outrage of many members of his front bench, particularly the member for Isaacs. The member for Isaacs, as I understand it, threatened to resign if Kimberley Kitching was appointed to the Senate. And if it's not true, he's quite welcome to say that he was misrepresented and explain the facts, because that is the very strong story that is circulating over the objections of former Senator Conroy, the objections of members of the right-wing faction from his own state. He put into the Senate a person who had fraudulently filled out the test, it is alleged, of union leaders, putting workers in danger in the workplace. That's the real respect they have for
The Minister's time
safety.
has expired. The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday the Minister for Revenue said she wanted to lift superannuation funds to the same standards as the banks. So is the former New South Wales Liberal leader and chairman of Industry Super Australia, Peter Collins, accurately describing government policy when he says, and I quote, "If super funds had been responsible for systemic failures in financial advice, failure to pass on interest rate cuts, excessive executive remuneration and other forms of profit gouging by banks, there would have been a royal commission into super funds in a flash."
Leader of the House, the Prime Minister has the call.
The honourable member knows very well that the government's sought to ensure that there are independent directors on industry super funds. That is hardly a radical proposal. This has been resisted by resisted by a number of the vested interests associated with the industry super funds, where, in many cases, as the honourable member knows, the directors are drawn solely from the employers and the unions. All we are seeking to do is to install what is regarded as corporate governance 101 in the rest of the corporate world. The honourable member should take care to represent the interests of the members, as opposed to once again representing the interests of union bosses who are very happy to sit in those well-paid directorships.
Member for Sydney, the member for Bennelong has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Will the Minister explain to the House how a re-established Australian Building and Construction Commission will ensure hard-working Australians receive the aged care services they deserve? What is standing in the way of this progress?
The Minister for Health and Aged Care. The member for Ballarat and the member for Greenway will cease interjecting. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Bennelong for his question about the important subject of aged care, in particular aged care residential facilities. And I'd just like to provide the House with a demonstration of our investment in this important policy area. This year it's estimated that Commonwealth funding in residential aged care will be about $65,000 per resident. This year aged care spending is estimated at $17.5 billion. That's actually 20% higher than it was in Labor's last budget, at least. And since June 2015, there's been an increase in about 3,500 operational residential aged care places. Aged care spending is increasing by an average of 6.7% a year. So, with this ageing population, Mr Speaker, and a figure that's only going to grow, it's important that we have adequate facilities to support Australians who need residential care and the ability for those Australians to access that care as soon as possible. New facilities are being built around the country. In many cases, it's a partnership with government capital investment and investment from the private sector. Now, unfortunately, the sites for these much-needed facilities are not immune to the union thuggery that all construction sites face. And I have an example which was reported in The Age in April this year. The Age reported that at aged care construction site in Templestowe, Victoria, up to 30 workers simply walked off the job, just like that. The company allegedly told the CFMEU officer present, "What you have done is illegal and I'm going to have to report you." to which the CFMEU officer allegedly responded, "I know it's illegal, but I had to do it." This is so wrong on so many levels, Mr Speaker. It just goes to show that the unions that are holding our construction sites to ransom can do these things just because they feel like it. Just because they feel like it. We are committed to restoring law and order on construction sites. And whenever I hear about an elderly Australian unable to get a residential aged care place, or that place costing more in terms of the capital to build it because of the union thuggery, I know that not enough is being done by this Labor Party to sort out the union bosses who are running the show. And we only have to reflect on the words of the Trade Union Royal Commission about the systemic world of louts, thugs, bullies, thieves and perjurers. This is across the board. It's operating in a construction site near each one of these Labor Party members. None of them are doing anything about it, but what it is doing is affecting the aged care places, the residential funding and the cost of those to everyday Australians.
Has expired. The member for Hindmarsh.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. The member for Mallee said the Deputy Prime Minister was right to abandon the bipartisan commitment for an additional 450 gigalitres in the Murray-Darling Basin plan, saying, and I quote, "South Australia will get more water than it can actually handle." Is it the position of the government that the Basin Plan delivers more water than South Australia can actually handle?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the honourable member, and I have the Basin Plan here, which I'll refer to in a moment. Mr Speaker, the Australian government is committed to delivering the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in full and on time. Our policy has not changed. The Basin Plan is based on an approach to water management that delivers a healthy basin, supports productive industries, confident communities and a resilient environment. There are challenges in delivering anything as complex as the Basin Plan. And what we need to remember, Mr Speaker, is that in delivering additional water for the environment, the sustainability of communities in economic and social terms must be preserved. And I'll refer the honourable member to section 7.17 of the Basin Plan, and what it makes very clear, is that there must be neutral or improved socio-economic outcomes associated with the removal of, or the conversion of water from consumptive to environmental uses. Now, that is what is in the plan. That's what the plan says. Now, nobody's saying it's easy. You know, I think it was Mark Twain that said, "Whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over." I remember that very well. I was the water minister. I understand this. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan was put in place when I was the water minister under John Howard. It is always contentious, but the reality is that what we have to do is to find the solutions, the mechanisms that enable us to return water to the environment in a way that does not disadvantage basin communities in social or economic forms. There will always be arguments about water. There will always be disputes about it, but where there is goodwill and a dynamic, constructive approach, then we will be able to deliver the plan in full, as we are committed to. And what I'd invite the honourable member to do is to work with us and to encourage his colleagues in the South Australian government to work with us. Some of the language that was used by the South Australian Water Minister, I have to say, was not constructive, was not calculated to assist in resolution. But the bottom line is this: we are committed to the plan, but the plan has provisions. And the provision I just read out to the honourable member is very clear. And the honourable member for Watson opposite knows this very well. He was the water minister. He knows it very well. And he, for example, in 2012, he has set up a review of the Northern Basin Plan to look at precisely this point. So we know it's challenging, but we're up to it and we're going to deliver it.
The member for Chisholm has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science. Will the Minister update the House on what the government is doing to promote Australian industry, business and jobs for hard-working Australians? Is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches that would hurt Australian industry, business and jobs?
The Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member and acknowledge that she comes to this place not just as the victor of Chisholm, but also as somebody who has had a distinguished career in businesses that are providing jobs for numerous Australians. And as part of that work, she has been passionate about creating job opportunities for Australians. And in that light, I'm pleased to inform the House that last Thursday the member for Reid, in his capacity as Assistant Minister, and myself met with all of the states and territories and achieved exactly what the Prime Minister was talking about, a good working relationship and an outcome where all of the Labor states and territories, as well as the coalition states and territories, agreed on a national business simplification initiative aimed at creating jobs. So unanimity across the jurisdictions with the federal government. And the examples of what we're proposing to do to create jobs include working with New South Wales on bringing down the time for formation of a cafe from 18 months to 3 months, working with South Australia on food handling standards and simplifying those, with Victoria on creating faster approaches to registering and starting retail businesses, with Tasmania on ecotourism being expedited and, for example, with Queensland on faster approaches to registering and creating agricultural and manufacturing businesses. Real action which will create jobs. That has been twinned this week with the work of the Parliament in passing the Registered Organisations Commission bill and the progress that is being made on the ABCC, two things that will assist in not just establishing businesses but in allowing the construction which is necessary to house these businesses to go ahead. I'm asked if there are alternatives to this approach of actually creating jobs and actually allowing businesses to be created. And yes, there are. Our friends on the other side are resolutely opposed to any action which will rein in union tyranny and thuggery in the workplace. Let me give you an example. Moose Toys, the Australian-based maker of Betty Spaghetti, of Little Live Pets, which of course the CFME uses as a way of referring to Bill and Berkey. Moose Toys.
No, the Minister for the Environment
I apologise.
will refer
I
to members
withdraw.
by their correct titles.
Moose Toys was accused and threatened on site with the phrase by a CFMEU official, "You don't want to be the dog who calls the cop on a union official." Why would they tolerate that sort of intimidation of an Australian business? The reason why is they stand for the thugs, they don't stand for the businesses. We're creating jobs and we're making it simpler to do business.
The member for Gorton has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the video of a Brisbane 7-Eleven employee being forced to return half her wages to her employer in cash. As a result of this cashback scam, staff are paid $11 an hour below the minimum wage. Given the Prime Minister's own ministerial standards requires ministers to act with the highest standards of integrity, how can the Prime Minister possibly justify his ongoing holdings in managed funds which invest in 7-Eleven?
Members on my right, the member for Wakefield will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, as honourable members are aware, my and my wife's investments are managed for us by an external advisor. They are managed. They are invested almost entirely, for the most part, in any event, in large managed funds, which have typically index funds, exchange-traded funds, which have a wide range of investments, very typically, very similar to the large superannuation funds that many other members, including members opposite, have their funds invested in. So the point, what I'd suggest to the honourable member is that he now scour through the very large, the large portfolios of all the managed funds that are opposite. But the point of the matter is this. The point of the matter is that I don't choose those stocks. I don't choose those stocks those funds invest in. I'm completely transparent, and they are there, and the allocation of the funds is a matter for my advisor. So it's kept very much at arm's length from me. It's thoroughly transparent and at arm's length.
The member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the minister update the House on steps the government has taken to secure our borders and achieve third-country resettlement pathways? Is the minister aware of any alternative approach?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question. It's a particularly important question because, as we all know, people smugglers have not gone out of business. People smugglers right now are trying to get people to pay money to hop onto boats, and tragically we know the arrangement, the outcome if we lose control of our borders, because it was evidenced over the 6 years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years when the Leader of the Opposition was a senior member within that cabinet. There were 1,200 people, including women and children, who drowned at sea. There were thousands and thousands of children put into detention, and it was the case that 50,000 people arrived on 800 boats, and we are still cleaning up Labor's mess. Now, having got the children out of detention, having closed the 17 detention centres, having not had a successful people smuggling venture arrive in now over 800 days, having closed and fixed up this mess and this sad chapter in Labor history, our determination, Mr. Speaker, is to get women and children and all of those people on Nauru and Manus off those two islands, but to do it in such a way that we don't recommence new boat arrivals. I don't want to fill the vacancies that we create with new arrivals, which is the policy prescription that Labor is putting forward. We have had representatives from the Homeland Security and State Departments from the United States and Australia over the course of the last week or so, talking through with officials from my department ways in which we can screen people very quickly and facilitate their removal to Australia. I don't want, Mr. Speaker, the people smugglers to hear the weak message being conveyed by the Leader of the Opposition, as we've seen over the course of the last couple of weeks. The Leader of the Opposition is intent on creating whatever distraction he can, but the reality remains that this Leader of the Opposition presides over a weak and divided party. They were weak and divided when they were in government. They are weak and divided now, and the people smugglers saw a weak leader in Kevin Rudd. They saw a weak leader in Julia Gillard, and they know this Leader of the Opposition is at least as weak as they are. And I see a notification today that the policy unit of the Labor Party has been taken over by the left of his party. Now, that is a terrible development, because the people smugglers were rubbing their hands together when Labor was last in power, because the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that the left of the party completely dominate this border protection policy, and that is why 26 people in the Labor Party came out against the government's legislation that we've passed through the lower house, and at every opportunity this Leader of the Opposition shows that he is unfit to be Prime Minister of this country, and if he were to be elected at the next election, as sure as night follows day, the boats would restart.
Members on my left will cease interjecting. I gave the member for Wakefield his final warning. He kept interjecting. He can leave under 94A. And the Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is directed to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm his government has threatened to sue Mark Rogers, a Sydney grandfather, over his use of the Medicare logo on his Save Medicare website? Will the government also be threatening legal action against the Liberal Party, the member for Ford, the Minister for Trade, the member for Bonner and the Health Minister, who have all used the Medicare logo in their own political material?
Manager of Opposition Business knows the rules on props. Members on my left. The Prime Minister has the
There's a
call.
question
Members on my
notice,
left and right will cease
See
interjecting.
if that litigation is as he's described.
The member for Corangamite.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. Will the Minister update the House on what the government is doing to provide support services to people affected by family and domestic violence? How important is it that the government provides these services in our community?
The Minister for Social Services.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for her question on this very important issue. And of course, on 28 October of this year, the Prime Minister announced $100 million worth of support to the Third Action Plan for Reducing Violence Against Women. And in September of 2015, the Prime Minister announced a $100 million women's safety package. And the question directed to the way in which these fund important services. And perhaps there's no more important service being funded with this very large increase in funding, which has been made possible by the commitment of the Prime Minister, than the 1-800-RESPECT hotline. That translates to practical assistance for women in need on the ground. And since its inception, the hotline has been operated by Medibank Health Solutions, and it's used trauma counsellors from the Rape and Domestic Violence Services. Since 2010, there's been a much greater awareness of the issue, and that has given rise to a greater number of people wanting to use this hotline. That is in itself a measure of some success as awareness increases. The unfortunate outcome, however, was that before we undertook recent reforms, the call wait time had blown out to over 10 minutes, and that had meant that a whole range of women who were seeking assistance had actually given up waiting, and the call abandonment rate had lifted up to 44%. As a government, with the funding that the Prime Minister allocated, we did three things. We commissioned an independent report to look into best practice models here and overseas. We worked with Medibank Health Solutions to try and tailor the single best practical option that we could institute here. That option involved a first responder triage model, so that the first person you would talk to would be someone with at least 3-year degree qualification in a relevant tertiary field, plus a minimum of 2 years' experience in counselling. If you needed specialist trauma counselling, you were seamlessly directed to that at the very point of the phone call. The third thing we did is we steeled ourselves to what is inevitably a level of criticism you get when you engage in reform of this nature. I just note here some of that criticism took the form. Ms Jenna Price, through the Sydney Morning Herald, said that this would destroy 1-800-RESPECT. The member for Griffith, in agreeing with that, said that the changes were terrible, that they would divert people away from trauma specialist counselling. It might assist the member for Griffith to know that these have been the results. 80% of calls are now answered in 20 seconds. The average call wait time has dropped from over 10 minutes to 35 seconds. The call abandonment rate, Mr Speaker, the call abandonment rate in this incredibly important area has dropped down from 44% to 5.5%. Not terrible changes, as we would be led to believe by the member for Griffiths in the context of election campaign. Tremendous changes that help women in their greatest time of need when domestic violence.
The minister's time's expired. The manager of opposition business seeking the call. Manager of opposition business.
Take a point of order, but I'll ask a question.
Manager of opposition business.
My question's to the Prime Minister. When the Deputy Prime Minister personally insisted on receiving the water portfolio in September 2015, did he keep secret from the Prime Minister his intention to undermine the additional 450 gigalitres in the Murray-Darling Basin plan? Did the Prime Minister have any idea prior to Friday that his deputy had put in writing that the Basin plan would not be completed? And since then, has the Prime Minister in any way reprimanded the Deputy Prime Minister for free-ranging on the Basin plan?
The
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science.
Characteristically from the opposition, we have one misrepresentation after another. The fact is the government is committed to the Basin plan, and if I may just remind honourable members that the section I referred to from the Basin plan is the Basin Plan 2012, right? So this is a plan that the honourable member is very familiar with. Indeed, I see here on the front page I, Tony Burke, Minister for Sustainability, Environment, Water, Population and Communities. Gosh, no wonder he was so busy with all those things to do, he couldn't pay attention to water. There it is. This is the plan the honourable member promulgated as minister, and the section to which I referred is in his plan, and that is part of the plan to which we are committed.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituency question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy. Can the minister update the House on what the government is doing to provide a more reliable and affordable electricity supply for the constituents and businesses in my electorate of Boothby and across South Australia? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question and acknowledge her deep concern for the very high electricity prices her constituents pay, the highest in the national electricity market, and some 50% higher than the wholesale electricity prices that they pay over the border in Victoria. Now, this makes life tough for the Lucas Earth Movers, a family-owned business that I visited in the electorate of Boothby. Also, it makes life tough for the households in Mitcham and in Brighton, and also for the small businesses in Dover Gardens and Somerton Park. Mr Speaker, we know that Premier Weatherall was conducting a big experiment, in his own words, by the high uptake of intermittent power, namely solar and wind. But that big experiment failed when 1.7 million South Australians went into the black after the blackout in that state. Now, Mr Speaker, just yesterday we found out from the Australian Energy Regulator that there were some 10,000 electricity disconnections in South Australia over the last year. And of all the states and territories monitored by the AER, this was the highest of all the states and the territories, and that the amount owed by those hardship customers in South Australia was the highest of any state or territory monitored by the AER. Now, Mr Speaker, that is why the Coalition is determined to improve energy security and energy affordability, and we're doing that by pushing reforms into the gas market through the COAG Energy Council, by commissioning the Finkel review into energy security, by looking into the effectiveness of the limited merits review process, and by trying to get a coordinated, harmonised approach across states and the federal government when it comes to the renewable energy target. But we're getting no help by those opposite, because they persist with their 50% unrealistic and job-destroying renewable energy target. They persist with a carbon tax, which we heard from the member for Hunter is a tax. And they persist, Mr Speaker, in trading away blue-collar jobs in the regions, in the coal-fired power stations, in order to win green votes in the city. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that the Leader of the Opposition wants to take Jay Weatherall's experiment and take it national, Mr Speaker. Shame on him. But you have to understand it's not just business, it's not just the Coalition who have a problem with Labor's approach, it's also members of the party represented by those opposite. Graham Richardson has described the Labor Party's policy as stupid, as a farce, as a sellout of the poor and the pensioners. They're not my words, they're Graham Richardson's. Only the Coalition can deliver energy security and energy affordability for all Australians.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Deputy Prime Minister's letter of the 17th of November indicating to the South Australian Government, indicating that the government would abandon its obligation to deliver 450 gigalitres of water to the Murray-Darling Basin through efficiency measures. Does the Deputy Prime Minister's letter reflect government policy?
Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
The Leader of the Opposition assists us by showing where in that letter the word abandon is used. Not once. Not once. Yet again, the Leader of the Opposition misrepresenting what ministers have said. He has no regard for the truth. He gave a long speech today in which he thoroughly misrepresented statements by the Minister for Immigration, dishonestly did so, and I might say, Mr Speaker, on the subject of the recklessness of the Leader of the Opposition, He quoted the member for Cowan who said, "I am fearful that the minister's comments will be used by an extreme few who would seek to harm the fabric of our society."
The Prime Minister
you can't
will
take
resume
it, can
his
you?
seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Members on both sides will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
On relevance, it was a very straight question. Does the Deputy Prime Minister's letter reflect government policy? Yes or no?
The Leader of the House and the Deputy Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The member for Corangamite will resume her seat. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister, the government, is committed to the policy which is to implement the Basin Plan, but the Basin Plan has conditions and qualifications and was set in place by the member for Watson when he was the minister, and I've just read a portion of it, and achieving that neutral or improved socio or economic outcomes is challenging. We recognise that, and that's why we need all jurisdictions to work together in a constructive way to achieve it. But, Mr Speaker, what we've seen today is this consistent, dishonest misrepresentation by the Leader of the Opposition. If it's not the Deputy Prime Minister, it's the Immigration Minister. Misrepresenting one minister after another, all reckless to the consequences of what he says, promoting anxiety, stirring up resentment, stirring up conflict. He has no regard for the consequences of what he does other than his own political interest.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I seek leave to table the letter from Barnaby Joyce because I don't think the Prime Minister's seen it.
The Leader of the Opposition will refer to members. The member for Corangamite will just resume her seat. No, the member for Corangamite will resume her seat. Members on both sides will cease interjecting. The Foreign Affairs Minister will cease interjecting. I say to the member for Corangamite, the practice makes very clear that leaders of political parties have certain precedents. The Leader of the Opposition will nonetheless refer to members by their correct titles.
Thank you for that. Oh, OK.
Leave is not granted. The member for Corangamite. Finally.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituency question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Could the minister update the House on the government's $1.5 billion Victorian infrastructure package, including $25 million for one of Australia's most important tourist attractions, the iconic, the majestic, the awe-inspiring Great Ocean Road?
The Minister for Transport and Infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Corangamite for her question. I'm not surprised to hear those opposite cheering the member for Corangamite. She's a very popular local member, and I note her commitment to securing funding for that iconic touring route, the Great Ocean Road. And, Mr Speaker, this is a government, the Turnbull-Joyce government, which is focused on delivering a $50 billion infrastructure investment program right across Australia, in our cities, in our major regional centres, in our rural and remote communities. And we do that, Mr Speaker, because we recognise that investing in good infrastructure not only can change people's lives, but it can save people's lives. And too many people are dying and too many people are being seriously injured on our roads, Mr Speaker. In Victoria at the moment, tragically, as of today, 257 people have died on Victorian roads this year. The total last year was 226. Now, every death, obviously, Mr Speaker, is one too many, and that's why we're investing in safer roads right across Australia in projects like the Great Ocean Road. And I was pleased to be with the Prime Minister last week in Melbourne when we announced a $1.5 billion Victorian infrastructure package. And part of that package was $25 million for the Great Ocean Road through our $345 million regional roads package, which will see projects completed right across Victoria. The projects in the member for Corangamite's own seat involves safety measures around the recent landslips and rockfalls, which have impacted severely on this most scenic of all coastal routes. And the member for Corangamite has been very active in calling for the Victorian government to match that $25 million, and I'm very confident that the Victorian government will come on board and yield to her campaign and support us in that regard. In commending the member for Corangamite for her advocacy, I want to recognise, and I heard the member for Wannon cheering as well, the work that's going to occur in his electorate on the Princess Highway upgrades, work also along the Hamilton Highway, the Geelong Ring Road, the planning for the duplication of the Midland Highway between Geelong and Bannockburn. In fact, there are projects right across Victoria which are going to be made possible through the Prime Minister's announcement last week. We are getting on with the job of delivering the infrastructure that Victoria needs. This government, under this package, under the Victorian $1.5 billion infrastructure package, is also delivering $220 million for the Murray Basin Freight Rail project. The member for Mallee has been a very strong advocate for that project. There's $500 million to go towards the Monash Freeway upgrade, bringing a total of $1 billion to go on reducing congestion on that route. The members for Latrobe, for Deakin, for Aston and Chisholm all been strong advocates for improvements to that congested route. There's $350 million to the upgrade of the M80 Ring Road, and as I mentioned, the $345 million for rural and regional roads. One of the signature projects will be the $97 million for the Echuca Bridge, which the new member for Murray has been a very strong advocate for. So, Mr Speaker, this is a good deal. It's a good deal for Victorians, and it's a good deal for the Victorian government. I'm sure they'll come on board and match that $1.5 billion.
Has expired. The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Did the Prime Minister have any advance notice of the contents of his Deputy's letter of 17th November?
The Prime Minister has the call. Leader of the House.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister understands the Basin Plan very well, as do I, as indeed does the member for Watson, and he understands that the government is committed to fulfilling it, and he understands the provisions of the Basin Plan and the need for jurisdictions to work together to ensure it is delivered. And the commitment of our government to the Basin Plan is absolute, but it is a plan which presents significant challenges, which the member for Watson understood back in 2012 when he had the Northern Basin, the Northern Basin aspects of the plan reviewed to look at precisely these issues of ensuring that there is neutral or improved socio-economic outcomes. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice.
I thank the Prime Minister.